Hello and welcome to the Information Security Summit podcast. I'm Robert Nettgen, and we're recording our podcast live. Of course, it's not live when you're watching it, you're watching a recording, but we're doing this live. I mean, we're alive, so I guess did I say that right? Anyway, we're at the conference in 2025, the Information Security Summit, held in Westlake, Ohio at the Center Conference Center. And this is an annual gathering of security professionals. This is the 23rd annual conference. And gosh, if you want to attend this and you hear about it, register fast, because this is like the third or fourth year in a row that this is sold out. It's really, really cool in terms of a conference. And there are a lot of familiar faces we see at this conference. Many of us, after a couple of years, get to know each other. And I look over here at Tom. It's like, wait a minute, I know this guy. And he's smiling. He's like, oh yeah, I know Rob. He's, oh yeah, it's Rob. No, I'm just kidding. But Tom's here. He's with Project Lead the Way. And Tom, you're going to talk about resilience and what that really means. As I'm looking at my sheet over here that kind of guide me as podcast host. And tell me, what is Project Lead the Way?
Project Lead the Way is an educational platform company that we work with K through 12 in the United States, and we provide them consistent pathways for learning. And what it's predicated on is critical thinking, structured problem solving, and then it gives them the ability to use transferable skills from one course to another. And it's an elective offered across many school systems in the United States.
Wow, that's big. That's big. And you're not just talking about security. I mean, you're talking a much broader topic here, as you're describing.
Right, because what we want to do is help children on their educational journey, and that's our commitment, and that's the teacher's commitment, that's the school's commitment, that's the community's commitment. And so when we look at resilience, what we want to do is make sure that we're incorporating those things from a adaptive perspective, meaning you can't plan for everything that's going to potentially occur. So from an operations perspective, you've got to make sure that you actually understand a lot more about what could go wrong, from leading indicators and sensors that may be out there that say, hey, there are things that are occurring, and I don't know if you know it, everyone's pretty much shifted to the cloud ecosystems. So sometimes it's no longer sitting in your own data center or a co-location, it's in someone else's data center, and you're subject to those types of concerns, but you can't avoid having an outage all the time, but how you actually prepare for that outage may allow you to continue to deliver those services to the consumers, such as students and teachers, when they're in their classrooms on a daily basis.
So the world of education, teachers, wow, they really have a challenge nowadays. I mean, everybody has a challenge keeping up with technological advances and what's changing, and the style of doing things today versus the style of doing things a decade or two previously. But teachers have not only that challenge, but also the challenge of just being savvy in terms of what the threat landscape is. And are you talking about a threat landscape in your education? Or is it way beyond that? And
it's way beyond that. It's more of the basic math and English and those types of things, as well as when they get into some of the more advanced courses where it's engineering based or it's STEM related. But what we want to do is make sure that we set them up for success by actually making sure teachers in schools, as well as ourselves from a partner perspective, can build that envelope of security and privacy around the information that's shared with us. So we focus on data minimization. The school districts have to collect all this information, but we don't need it to provide good quality education platform and services for the teachers that the students can log into. All we need to do is use very minimal amounts of information, and that's help protects everyone's best interest.
So you're changing the way that school systems think about how they do their work in terms of what you're educating them. You're saying, you're talking about the amount of information they gather, and perhaps this is a paradigm shift for them. Is that what you're describing?
It's a paradigm shift, but it happened during the COVID years, right? Because everyone had to go to more remote learning. So there's a lot of different educational platforms out there, and we're just one of a multitude that are offering different types of approaches in a similar delivery mechanism, which is through the cloud and through secure platforms and using data minimization, so that way it manages that associated risk to that individual student and educator's privacy. So we have to live up to those obligations that the school's subject to, as well as how that translates into our service.
So you're protecting the data by simply minimizing the data that's being gathered. And what has been the reaction from schools that you've worked with? Do they object to that, or do they say, "Oh, gee, yeah, maybe"? I mean, what has been the reaction?
They expect that, because of the local obligations that they have from a state perspective and their school districts. They actually set the constraints around what is or is not going to be allowed. So there's a lot of reviews that go on before we actually onboard a school. But that's no different than any other business that might be out there, because you go through the same types of challenges with your partners that you select to help you deliver that value exchange with your customers. And so it's very similar to any other business that's out there. It just may be a different set of statutory obligations from a legal perspective, but the requirements are pretty much very similar across industries.
How long has your organization been doing this?
Over 25 years. So we've been doing it in one engineering course to then build on to other pathways and capabilities that we're offering now in the curriculum.
And how has this changed over that 25-year period? What changes are, from your perspective, are most significant?
It was more of the inclusion of the STEM topics in the past 5 to 6 years, especially when you look at the shift to remote learning for the COVID years, where students were not allowed to go into the schools, educators weren't allowed to be in the schools. So it was how you deliver it and how you have to be able to be reactive in a quicker manner. So you could never do those same things if you had it in your own data center, because you couldn't do some of the typical operational type things that you need to do to spin up different instances, to be able to offer courses on demand, and spin them back down and have all the security wrapped around it.
Teaching science via Zoom has to be unrealistically difficult. I'm trying to think of how to describe that. I mean, I have some perspective which I won't get into, but I'm trying to think of how did teachers meet, or did they even meet that challenge? I'm thinking to myself, especially with lab classes, how do you do a lab where you're supposed to be working with tactile things in front of you, and you don't have that in front of you? It's abstracted from you because of the nature of that circumstance, that event.
So that was a challenge for the time that students were not in the physical school. So our program actually does offer classroom components as well as part of the education effort and the journey. And so,
what do you mean by classroom components?
Like robotics. So there are robotic components where they learn to go ahead and build robots and actually make them purpose-built. But we use trusted partners for that delivery to the schools, from subscription services, et cetera.
Okay,
all
but
those
that's
things.
still an in-person learning
That's
scenario.
still an in-person learning scenario.
Okay, so we're still stuck if, God forbid, we ever get a remote learning scenario.
There are ways to use simulators that are being evaluated and things like that across many different spectrums, many different industries. How can we actually be effective in supporting whatever that value exchange is with your customers, whether it be in education, whether it be in banking and finance, manufacturing? Everyone has those same challenges. If you're not someplace, it sometimes causes problems with how you deliver your service that support that value exchange with your customers, whoever those customers or consumers may be. So that's why I say it's not unique to the educational environment, that all businesses face the same type of consideration. It's all about what you deliver, how you deliver it, where you deliver it from. The type of constraints that we always have from a business continuity concern perspective. Now it's how can you be more proactive in leading indicators that say you might have to prepare to do something a little bit different, but is that in your operational plan already, instead of waiting to say, oh, something's just happened and now we're going to pull out a plan. Well, resilience says, why don't you try to predict more accurately what could fail and then build that into your operational management plan of how you continue to deliver. For a classroom situation, it may just be you may not be able to do some of the hands-on things for that particular day, but those are things that you build into your overall approach. It's no different than a banking transaction that wouldn't be available for someone to pull money out of an ATM unless you've planned for those types of resilience challenges and say, how do we actually continue to support that value exchange with our customers through what their expectation set may be.
It sounds to me, because educators are very well trained and disciplined in the art of education.
Yes.
In fact, the schools are often described as schools of arts, and education is described as an art. But it sounds to me like you're bringing a lot of knowledge that's familiar to us in the business world, because the security nerds are familiar with a lot of the
The oopses?
yeah, the disaster recovery tests and the business continuity planning, the stuff that's familiar in the business world that security nerds have been well immersed in, and bringing it to the education world where they're like, wait a minute, I didn't see that course, when I took my master's degree. And is that the experience that you're bringing this paradigm of thinking from the business world to the education world? And is that the realization you're encountering?
I would say the realization is more of refinement, because they've already thought about some of this, so they actually can handle these types of things. Because to your point, the teachers in schools have had to deal with all kinds of different concerns at the local facility levels, and they're very good and adept at doing that. But when you change what provides the curriculum and where it's coming from all the time, you may have to change how you think about the delivery. It may be that you have to select a different option when you go to your public cloud partner provider to say, we need better availability, or maybe it falls into the traditional, where do you actually have your disaster recovery instance or your capability? Is it in the same region in your cloud provider, or do you also have one outside a region, so that way you're less likely to be negatively impacted if you actually have an outage in one region, because you now have the restoration and restore capability in a different region of your cloud provider.
So that's even prescient or current news, because we, of course, had another AWS event this week.
Cascading cloud impacts.
Yes. And so education, like everybody else, is feeling the impact of that. And if they have done some sort of planning for that, they potentially could have a contingency for that.
Right, and maybe uninterrupted services if it's a continuous availability model where no one has to push a button, it just automatically happens because certain things or certain triggers are impacted or tripped, let's say, then it automatically occurs and no one's the wiser. And that's what you do from a vendor management review process. That's what you look at from a business output perspective and say, what can we do to sustain that revenue stream? I go back to revenue stream because it is revenue stream focused, but it's more about the service that is expected that's actually paid for in that revenue stream, because you want to over deliver compared to what their expectations are. So if they hear there's an outage in the Midwest because of whatever reason, but they can still gain access to their information that they need to continue the educational journey, that's a great thing. But think about a bank, think about any other business. They want to do the exact same thing. So resilience should be a primary concern of those folks that say that they've done that planning from a business continuity perspective, because it's taking business continuity to a different level and saying, let's be more proactive with how we think about being adaptive in an ever-changing environment where threats may change, impacts may change, and they may be almost 100% outside of your control from a technology perspective because it's sitting in someone else's data center in the cloud, on someone else's network that you have no control over, but you do have it from a contractual obligation perspective.
How do the folks in the education world find you? Are they talking amongst yourselves and say, hey, you got to talk to Tom? I mean, are you being referred to them? Are you being exposed through education associations? What is the way that your organization is finding its path out to these educational groups?
We've got a long-standing relationship with different school districts and different states and their education boards and authorities. And so we leverage every way that we can to get out in front of the school districts, because every school district may have multiple schools or one school. It just depends on what size they are. And they all have the same considerations and concerns that we have to be able to address, from deliver the service, deliver it reliably, so that way we can help the children on their educational journey benefit from what we can provide them. And so I actually get involved quite often up front when we're talking about contract renewals or bringing on new programs with schools. We actually work with the schools to make sure we comply with their requirements. We're fortunately an ISO 27001 certified organization, which tends to allow us to have a different level of conversation because we have a third-party attestation for security and compliance that makes them comfortable that we're responsible with how we handle and how we execute and operate and actually support their mission to deliver that quality education.
Is the scope of your organization just local within Ohio, or are you going?
It's actually across the United States.
It is across the U.S.
Yes, and so we actually have resources in many of the states because we're a remote-first organization and we're a cloud-first organization. So at that point, we can provide services and have competence and confidence in our ability to answer our customers' questions. The school district, the consumers are typically the teachers and the or educators, teachers, and students. And so we're very good at actually leveraging a dispersed workforce and a cloud accessible platform.
Do you observe differences between those different educational regions? So you're working with multiple states. Do you find different issues in one state, one locale versus another?
From a regulatory obligation, every state has different laws, and so then the districts
They're all
actually
different.
Many are different. They're similar, but there's enough difference in where to look and which statute comes to play to say, okay, what could impact us and how we have to deliver, how we have to notify. So we have to build a common practice with the most prescriptive, least duration type of potential notifications of concerns or what we have to do according to particular states. So we have to build it so we have one consistent approach that's reliable process-wise, operationally executable, and then we can audit it, we can attest to it, and other people can look at evidence and say, you guys are doing what you say you do, and you're providing quality, reliable service.
Do you go beyond the public sphere? Do you work with non-public schools as well?
There are all different types of schools, whether they're charter schools, whether they're the traditional public schools. So we work across the board. There are always different opportunities, and it's not always preparing students for a 4-year degree. Maybe it's a 2-year degree. Maybe it's a technical school. Those are all types of things that are coming up in today's date and age because people want to make sure that they're getting a applicable set of knowledge that they can go out and use and actually build a career out of it. So the career pathways is always something that is very interesting to talk about with what that journey could look like for folks. I know that I went to a 4-year school. I might have been just as happy going out and becoming a mechanic or an HVAC tech. I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up, and maybe I will go be an HVAC tech for a couple of years. I don't know. But right now I'm happy doing what I'm doing from helping others on their educational journey.
My daughter recently graduated college, undergrad and a master's, and she was summa cum laude in both. And I got out of Tri-C. It was thank the Lottie. So education's very important.
Yes.
Education's very important. And,
whatever
and
form it takes.
Direction. Yes, and having direction in that world is very important.
Yep.
Folks who help education, folks who work in education, it's really important. Education is so fundamental to society. Education is what people need to function in a society and to function well. And Tom, we really appreciate what you're doing. And what recommendation would you give for folks who are involved with their local educational institutions in terms of what they can do to help them out, or maybe even say, hey, are you talking to those resilience folks, or how would they contact you, and what advice would you give people in general in that realm?
I would always say go through the management team at the district level, because they've got some very knowledgeable individuals with experience about what the concerns and considerations need to be for their particular district and, of course, the schools within that district, and work through them and the school boards to make sure that they're looking at how can they help make sure that student receives the education and the support that they need through any of the struggles and trials and tribulations that may happen someplace in the cloud ecosystem that may negatively or positively impact that child on their journey. And so we're just a small part of it. And it's not just the educational industry, because everybody would be wanting to do that same thing from a community group perspective. If you're relying on cloud services and you have a commitment and a value exchange with your community that you serve that might include students, educators, parents, it's transferable concerns across all of this.
You talk about depending on cloud services, it's just dawning on me. Google gives away their suite to schools, don't they?
I don't know actually if they give it away or if there's reduced cost, but there's some type of relationship there. And so many of them are in Google.
Too. They also have a similar relationship.
Yes, they do.
Heavily discounting, if not free, their suite of services.
Yep.
They're both doing that.
Yep.
And these are cloud services being provided to schools, and that's part of that whole picture that you're talking about. I'm just having a recollection of that detail.
Well, remember, it's all a change because everyone used to have their own data centers, whether they paid for the building and the facility or it was a co-location service. And now it's very convenient and flexible to go into the public cloud space because it gives you things that you could never afford to do on your own. So by just selecting going to the cloud, businesses of every type in every industry can benefit from the availability options that are in those environments. You just have to plan it. You have to say, what's my business need? How am I going to continue to support that value exchange with those consumers and customers I support?
Indeed. And having that planning and having that thought process and that organization makes a big difference from, oh, hey, we got this for free. Let's use it.
Yep.
It's a much different approach, and it's making sense to me now.
And I will say that the Microsoft teams and the Google teams that work with the educational environment and the schools and districts, they do a wonderful job. They really do. I have nothing but admiration for their passion and their commitment for the same outcome. And it's outcome-based that we look at. How can we actually prepare students or business participants of any type to be successful in what they're doing and what they're planning on doing and what they're going to attempt to do that's related to educational journey. Maybe they're a financial analyst, maybe they're a rocket scientist. It doesn't matter. It's transferability of that commitment.
I'm extending this thought here as you know, I'm like ready to wrap up because we've got lots of folks here at the summit, but it's occurring to me, all these thoughts popping into my head that, oh yeah, I remember that schools are also fighting ransomware. It's like every other quarter I read a story about some poor school district that gets nailed by ransomware events. Is the move to the cloud giving them any insulation against those types of impact, those types of events impacting them, or is it still a problem because they've got Windows-based PCs, that's their gateway to the cloud?
I mean, they're always going to have a problem because you have an endpoint device that could actually be part of a compromised vector for actually pilfering, infiltration, or malicious intent. By having the curriculum and some of the other systems sitting in the cloud, it does insulate some of their private information in a way that it may not have been done before, but there's always going to be concerns around the ransomware, et cetera. So you still have to have response.
Is there a flip side vulnerability, though, too? Because I can remember a bunch of dental businesses being taken out because their cloud provider was whacked with ransomware. Do they have that type of vulnerability perspective, too?
That is a vulnerability. The likelihood of that occurring is limited because you know that doesn't happen every day. So security posture probably is better by being in the cloud, at least a portion of how they deliver from start to finish their services. But as long as you have endpoints involved, I mean, you always have potential for a user to introduce certain types of bad things into the environment through phishing, malware,
Is that an
et cetera.
assumption that it's better, or do you help the school districts plan and carry out a way to validate that it's better?
We do it through third-party attestation. So with our partners that we use on the cloud side, we make sure that they have like your traditional certifications, and they have pen tests, and they have all these other things that will occur that say, we have confidence that you have a commitment and capability to deliver to the security and privacy requirements of information that we're putting into the system where it's hosted. But you have enterprise agreements in place to make sure that you have the boundaries in that envelope clearly defined with expectations from a contract language perspective as well as an operational perspective of how and what and when and who. But then you always have to think about how do you build more capability for actually managing risk better, and that's where you look at your optional insurance that may be out there for cyber insurance. Basically, schools have it, and then they ask their partners to have it as well.
They need to have cyber insurance, schools.
They would actually rely on their partners to do it if they don't have it. Depends on where the systems are.
Schools have strained budgets to begin with.
That's always a challenge.
So I'm thinking to myself, how do they stretch that already strained, if not non-existent, ability to expand the budget for something like cyber insurance, let alone other cyber protections, which, security nerds say, hey, you need this, hey, you need this, hey, you need this, and understand conceptually why, hey, you need this. But we're probably not the only voice talking to the schools that are saying, hey, you need this.
Right.
How do they make that judgment call of which one of those, hey, you need this statements actually gets the action?
It's all about their risk tolerance, their threat landscape, and the likelihood that they might or would be potential targets. And so they first ask that all of their partners traditionally provide the fact that they do have cyber insurance coverage and what limitations or what the descriptions are of the coverage to make sure.
The companies they're already paying money to, the organizations they're the educational supply chain, for lack of a better way of putting it.
Yep.
They're saying, okay, we're already established with you, you're already getting money, this is already, you must have this. And you're saying, make sure they have this, and that's a mechanism by which they can make their budget work.
Right, and then what we do is we get involved in discussions about, is it reasonable and what other third-party attestations might your partner have. It's no different than any other business. We recommend cyber insurance typically for anybody that is relying on technology to provide their services, but they don't manage their technology. It's someplace else. The cloud brings up the shared responsibility model considerations, where you actually have to say, okay, how much risk is that partner assuming and how much is the direct third party to that customer? But then the bigger concern right now with the cascading cloud outages is we found that there are some third parties that may have fourth party and fifth party relationships that may not be well understood or documented within contracts. And so it's incumbent on providers such as ourselves to say, okay, we have these third parties we know about and we do that review regularly, but how do we actually make sure of their fourth parties and fifth parties that we're not even sure that they have, and where maybe encryption key management sits in a recovery mode for a particular cloud provider? Because if a region's impacted, then they do their failover, right? And you're just thinking it works, but you don't even know they actually have it in some other cloud provider. And so those are questions that we need to start asking, and that's more of a resilience instead of a business continuity concern. And that's just one of the operational facets that you have to think about, talking about resilience compared to continuity.
Sharing the mindset very familiar to security nerds like us, to the folks in the education world where, again, this is not the everyday conversation, everyday thoughts that they have.
Nope.
Tom Hardin, Project Lead the Way, talking about resilience and what it means, and he's here at the Information Security Summit 2025 at this conference in Westlake, Ohio. The Information Security Summit has so many folks from so many different walks of life, so many different intersections, and that whole big topic of information and cybersecurity. And Tom, we're pleased to have you as part of the summit, and personally thank you for what you're doing for the education world and the value you're bringing to those professionals who want to educate the next generation in society.
And I can just say I'm successful in my role because the company and all the workforce members have a commitment that equals or is more passionate than what I am.
Indeed.
So it's not just information security, it's the business that makes it successful.
I'm Robert Nettgen here at the Information Security Summit, the year 2025 conference. Thank you.